Hello everyone, my name is Josh and welcome to Whims, and today I'm going to be talking about the 2024 film called Heretic. Now this film is about two women who are Mormons by the name of Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton. They're essentially going from door to door, essentially trying to convert or recruit people to their church, which is called the Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints, and they basically are going from door to door trying to recruit and convert people to their religion. But while they're on their way doing their rounds, they end up stopping off at a very strange address where a reclusive Englishman by the name of Mr. Reed, played by Hugh Grant, is living on his own, or he seems to be. He says he lives with his wife. But as they get invited into his home and they start to, relax with a cup of Coca-Cola and, the promise of blueberry pie, things go from very relaxed and very almost comfortable. And, of course, Hugh Grant, playing this character, does play his charm card to the extreme in this particular film, almost to the point where it's almost against type. It goes from a very relaxing conversation about all sorts of different things about their faith and what they like to do when they're not in the church. And it then goes from, that to talks about what do you think about polygamy and things like that. And it really does start to very slowly build. But what was very interesting about this film is it doesn't turn into your stereotypical thriller or horror movie. It does become more about what is the point of them being there? What is the point of them being trapped in this location with this very strange, eccentric old man who seems to be wanting to engage in a very intense discussion about the origin of religion. And at first he does give us very simple examples, like the example of Monopoly and a other game that was made back in the 1800s that was made by a woman, but she had died uncredited because, Monopoly became more successful, to, him talking about the Hollies and All I Need Is the Air That I Breathe, being almost, a carbon copy, beat for beat copy of something like, Creep by Radiohead. So there's all these different comparisons, and he even makes references to all these other different religions that do have particular parables and particular parallels and particular patterns that all have a very similar narrative. They all focus on, one person being the chosen one and this person being the product of a immaculate conception and various other things. And then they also have other debates on whether or not, religions are inherently sexist, because, a lot of them are about men and about raising men up. But then, of course, lots of people might say that's ridiculous because a lot of religions do often have women who have immaculate conceptions, which means they don't have to lay down with a man in order to give birth or in order to fall pregnant and all these other things. So there's all sorts of discussions that spiral, and the whole entire film, what Hugh Grant's character pitches to us is what is the true religion. But I think the big question is, and I think what the film wants you to go away with it, but it wants you to talk about it. I think the big question is, what does religion mean to you? And I think that's the big question that I think the film wants you to leave with. But I think what it wants you to also think about is what religion can be used for, what religion can be used for as a tool. Now, a lot of religions can be used as a way of kind of bringing people together. It can bring peace, harmony, and prosperity to the world. But then also it can be used, and I'm speaking very frankly here, it can often be used as a device to spread hatred. And I think that's kind of the through line that Hugh Grant's character of Mr. Reed wants you to consider when thinking about your options. And what he does to kind of establish this is he writes two words on these two separate doors in his study. And the entire place is basically set up as if, it's like an altar. There's like a church with two very different doors, and there's like something akin to pews on either side of these doors as well, facing these doors as well. So there's all these different things going on. But then you have these two doors, and he writes in chalk the words belief and disbelief. And only one of them has the way out. And the other one leads down to the basement, the other one leads potentially into the way out. So the only way to go out is to go further into the house, effectively. But all these different, the two sisters, Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton, both have different ways of dealing with this. Some people say, well, one of them says, "Oh, we feel completely convinced about what you've said, and we are going to think about what we're doing. So I'm going to go on this door." But then the other one's like going, "No, no, this is a trick question. You've got to go on this door because, of course, you need to stick to your morals." So if he gives you an argument, we need to fight back with an even bigger argument. And it turns into a bit of a thriller of the mind, where you do kind of find yourself thinking you do have to kind of outsmart your opponent, or outwit your opponent, kind of like in a chess game, in order to gain the upper hand. But what I really like about this film is it does focus more on discussions and ideas, and it does feel like the people who wrote and directed this really did feel like they were basically trying to make a film that felt like a Sarah Perry novel or a Dan Brown novel, where it's more about the ideas and what you're supposed to go away with, rather than full-on action. There is action, there is a forward momentum, but it's more about dialogue. And the dialogue does get very heavy. Like, say, for example, it starts off with him comparing, Monopoly to this other board game that came out in the 1900s, to, another example of there being, what came first, what was the more, successful story? Was it the Hollies with the air that I breathe, or is it, Radiohead's Creep? Like, all these different things are coming together, but what the basic idea is, it doesn't matter what came first, all that matters is what is the true religion, and that's kind of his idea. But what I think the film is trying to make you think is, what does religion bring to you? What does religion mean to you? What do you make of religion? Because it's how you do it. It's how you interpret what you learn. There's no inherent good or evil in religion. It's just basically how you interpret what you learn, and it's how you take those morals and ideas out into the world. And that's effectively what the film is trying to make you walk away with. But what I really like is that the film isn't just simply a very good dialogue-heavy story. It's also a very effective thriller. There were moments where I genuinely felt like, oh, I know who's going to be the first to die, or oh, I know what's going to happen here. But surprisingly enough, the script does a few interesting twists and turns. Like, the character who I thought was going to be the most developed, or the character that was going to have the biggest, presence, or the biggest, amount of screen time, was going to be this character. I think her name's Sister Paxton, where she is basically all dressed in black, and she essentially, has a much more staunch belief in her view in her beliefs, but then she also has a bit of a traumatic past, where she could potentially have been the victim of abuse, potentially, but then she also was probably the victim of other such things throughout her childhood, but she still finds, comfort and, guidance in her religion, whereas Sister Barnes is kind of the opposite. She's the one who, is very plucky, and she's very kind of, open-minded. She's always got a smile on her face, and she's always softly spoken. She's very open to hearing about different things, but then she's also kind of a bit, confused whenever someone confronts her with almost like a counteractive argument. And it's actually really interesting, because at first I thought, okay, Sister Paxton's going to be the one who becomes almost like our final girl in these horror movies, where they basically have to come out on top. I thought she was going to be like the character in The Menu, like Margot, who is the one who gets the most focus, she gets the most development, so she's the one who ends up living in the end. But then the script fools you. It does a few twists and turns here and there. I'm going to say there are big spoilers, because there are a few surprises in this film. And I do think that's one of the things that I really do like about this film, is you do think it's going to be this very stereotypical thriller at first, but then it becomes more about, how these characters are going to survive. But then it does also encourage a few interesting talks and discussions as well. So it does want you to think about what's going on and what these characters are talking about. And it isn't just simply a case of, oh yeah, we have to run and hide, and there's going to be a lot of blood, there's going to be a lot of strong language. It's not like a very intense Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or, Rob Zombie's Devil's Rejects kind of thing, where it is very intense, very hyperactive, and very kind of, almost like it's on a sugar rush almost. It feels like it is trying to make you think about things and really kind of put things into perspective, and I really do like that. But then at the same time, it's also a very intelligently written script. It feels like this is probably the only time where I've actually seen a film that actually does feel like a stage play. This film does feel like it has a lot of its background in theatre. I wouldn't be surprised if the original writers of this film originally envisioned this film as a play originally, but they had to scale it down because, of course, they wanted to pitch it to a studio, or a studio picked it up and said this needs to be a movie. it's actually quite interesting to debate, but I feel like this does have a very, stage play type feel where all the characters are there's only a few characters in the film. There's only about 3-4 characters in the whole film. One character is kind of, he has a bit of a presence, but he doesn't really happen to be in the film that long. But what's very interesting is that these 3 characters are in this room and they're talking. And that's all it is. And it's very interesting, but they've managed to make it so engrossing and so engaging so that when you move to another location, it does feel like a bit of a bait and switch, but it feels like a very interesting development in the story rather than, it's just been pulled out of the director's arse and he's just basically trying to figure out a way of, of building up the runtime and really kind of, stretching it out. But what's really great is that the dialogue keeps you interested. This film would not work if the dialogue wasn't as compelling. If the dialogue was badly written, or if you didn't have a charismatic lead, like in the case of Hugh Grant, I don't think this film would have worked nearly as well. I think if you had a very stereotypical horror aficionado like a Ralph Fiennes or something like that, someone who has been known for playing these very intimidating roles, I don't think this script or this story would have worked nearly as well. But I think after seeing films at the menu, I do believe that someone like Ralph Fiennes would have carried this story. But I feel like Hugh Grant adds something interesting in the sense that he is this very charming, because we all know Hugh Grant from the rom-coms, from the Bridget Jones's Diaries, your Four Weddings and the Funerals, your Love Actuallys, your 9 Months, or your Morrises or anything like that. Like we really do know him as kind of like this very charming, charismatic, shucks kind of, leading man character who's very awkward and very nervous. Like he is very charming, especially when he plays the Prime Minister in Love Actually. You really do get the sense he's this very charming fellow. But when he plays Mr. Reed, he does play him as that same charming fellow, but a little bit older, and you do feel like he doesn't get angry with people. And I think when he doesn't get angry, I think that makes him even more terrifying. And it really does make me kind of think to myself, I want him to shout and scream, because at least that would make him feel a little bit more human. He's almost like if you had a very calm, relaxed, very mild-mannered character as a horror movie villain. It feels like that kind of character where he is just very relaxed and very calm. He almost feels like a character in an anime, like Monster or Griffith from Berserk. It's almost like if he became a character in a horror movie, it's because he's so calm, but he's so well-spoken and so articulate that really makes him terrifying. And I think that's the thing that they want to make you go with. Or who's that guy in Full Metal Alchemist? The guy who turns his daughter into a chimera. He feels like that guy to me. Like if he was made in live action and if he was played by Hugh Grant, he feels like that type of character who feels like he looks very innocent and very well-meaning enough, but then he'll do something that really makes you hate him, kind of thing. And it really is quite surprising. But I do feel like that's kind of what Hugh Grant tries to do with this character, is he is trying to make this character who is very charming and very charismatic, so that it is surprising when he does all these shocking things. But it is really wonderful. It's a very well written script, and it doesn't rely too much on sensationalising violence or gore or even, sex or anything like that. It is basically very laid back. It feels like a horror film if it was made in the 60s, where it relies more heavily on psychological horror, and it does focus more. It feels more like a spiritual horror film than it does or psychological horror film than it does a slasher film or a supernatural film or a possession film. It does feel more like a horror film of ideas, and it does feel like it is trying to present these ideas in an interesting way. And I think the film does a very good job of presenting itself in a very interesting way. The dialogue's well written, the performances are really wonderful, and even I will be praising the actor who plays Mr. Reed, Hugh Grant, who is the star of the show. His face is on the poster. But I feel like the actresses who play Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton also do a very good job of playing their characters and really showing the progression and the growth of these women, because they go from being these very kind of one-way thinking religious people to sort of these religious Mormons, but then they go to be these very intelligent. They show that they are very sophisticated and that they do know bits and pieces here and there about what they're able to interpret from what they've seen in the evening. And there are a couple of surprises here and there which I won't spoil, but I will say that this film is worth watching on the big screen. It is a very much more subdued film, and it doesn't feel like it has a rollicking action budget. There's no special effects or anything like that. There is practical special effects, but there isn't, groundbreaking CGI or characters like Cthulhu popping out here and there. But I do feel like just because it doesn't have a big budget, or just because it has a few people in a room talking, doesn't mean it isn't compelling. Like, so this feels like the horror movie equivalent of something like My Dinner with Andre, where basically the entire premise of that film is you're basically watching two friends who haven't seen each other in a long time, getting together, having a little chat and having dinner. That's all the film is in a nutshell. But what becomes the interesting hook of that film is the dialogue and what they talk about and how they present themselves and how they tell these stories. And Andre Gregory is one of those actors and one of those writers who really can tell a really good story with his voice. And the way he tells stories in that film engrosses you, and the film wants you to focus on that. But it isn't just simply like, oh, this is the answer to all my problems. The film actually does flip the script a couple of times, and again, it's like Heretic, in the sense that yes, Heretic is more like a thriller or a horror film, but it feels like it has more in common with Dinner with Andre than it does with any other horror film that's been presented, or any film with religious themes, or any thrillers with religious themes. It does feel like it has more in common with something like My Dinner with Andre, and I would highly recommend watching both. I'd highly recommend watching Heretic because that film's on the big screen right now, but I would highly recommend watching this film. It was much more sophisticated than I originally thought it would be. It's got engaging performances and the writing is wonderful, and even characters who are basically just there for one or two scenes, like Tolfa Grace. He does a really good job of playing like this minister at this local church, this local Mormon church. He is a very compelling character, and I like the fact that he basically is just this very silent, very kind of, laid back or very kind of silent, mostly morose looking individual, but he does care about his pupils, so that's why he goes after them and tries to look for them. But like I said, even though you've probably seen a lot of thrillers that do have these sorts of templates where someone goes missing and someone goes to find them, it does flip the script in a few areas, and I do think I want to save those surprises. So if you haven't seen this film, please go and watch it. It's a fabulous thriller, it's a fabulous horror movie, and it really is well written. It's very intelligent, it's very thought-provoking, but it also manages to be quite funny in a lot of areas. Like, there were a lot of moments where Hugh Grant would be talking in these very intense discussions using these very big words like, what is the fundamental ideas? All these religions throughout history have had all these different things to do, and then now we go from that religion to Star Wars. Can anyone imagine Jar Jar being, a prophet or something like that? And I really do love that bait and switch where it's like he goes from talking very intensely about all these different religions and then he goes into jumping into Star Wars. And it was one of those moments where I actually burst out laughing upon hearing that. Like, there is genuine humour in this, but it really does do a very good job of not ruining the tone of what they're trying to do with the words and the story that they're trying to tell. And it is very intelligent, it's very funny in a lot of places, but it doesn't try to oversell itself as a comedy. It more or less uses humour to kind of take you off guard or to disarm you a little bit, but then it doesn't really kind of ruin the pacing or the flow of the story that they're trying to tell. So it is very well done, and I would highly recommend checking this film out if you can at your local cinemas. It really is an amazing film, and let me know what you thought of this film in the comments. What did you think of Heretic? Did you like it? Didn't you like it? Or whatever your thoughts are, please let me know in the comments below. And that's my review for Heretic. I hope you're all having a very good day. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to see more reviews, please subscribe today. And I would also say look out for my review of Eyes Wide Shut coming soon. I hope you're all doing very well. And this has been Joshua of Whims, or Whimsical Industry Musings. I hope you're all having a very good day. Take care. Bye for now.